Have you felt it yet? That little flicker of worry when you watch AI do something in 30 seconds that used to take you half a day. Maybe you laughed it off, or maybe you closed your laptop and went outside for a walk. Or maybe you did what so many of us high achievers do. You added some sort of figure out how AI did that to a to do list that was already too long. Or maybe you're on the other end of this entirely. You use AI every day, it's woven into how you plan, build, and think. And precisely because you know what it can do, a question has started to surface. As this technology keeps getting better, what's the part of my work that's still unmistakably mine? Here's the thing, whether you're AI curious, AI avoidant, or AI fluent, you're circling a similar question, starting to think about what does it look like to flourish as humans as technology continues to improve at such an exponential rate? What does it look like to upskill in this space? And how do we get on a path to staying relevant in the age of AI that doesn't take us to becoming more machine like and trying to chase that, but instead is about becoming more deeply and unmistakably human? My guest today has spent her career at the intersection of technology and one of humanity's most essential resources, water. She's advised water utilities and technology companies around the world on digital transformation, authored more than 23 peer reviewed publications, including a Wiley book, and spoken on stages from the Global Water Summit to World Water Tech. For the last 3 years, she's focused on how generative AI is reshaping an entire global industry and what it means for the people working in it. And one of the things that drew me to this conversation is where her thinking has landed, a vision of the future workplace where humans are flourishing, more creative, more empathetic, more of what we're meant to be. So, we're going to talk about how to learn the fundamentals of this technology, how to experiment with curiosity instead of fear, and what to even do with the time that AI gives back to you. So I'm so delighted to be joined today by
Gigi Karmous-Edwards.
Gigi. Thank you so much for joining.
Thank you for having me. I'm so excited about this conversation.
Tell us a little bit about your backstory.
I remember reading a New York Times article about the global water crisis. And I'm originally from Egypt, from the Middle East. And so I know how precious water is. And I decided that I wanted to I wanted to apply the things that we were learning in academic research to the water sector. And so I remember applying for my very first job. It was census here in Raleigh and going into that interview. And it says, I don't have experience in water, but I drink water, I swim in water, I love water. And I know how precious it is. And somehow or another, I got that job as a director of technology, and that got me started. And for the last 8 years, I've had my own business, Karmous-Edwards Consulting, where, as you said, I help water utilities and vendors. As this technology came out, it's really interesting. I was part of a think tank, and we brought up Chat GPT, and it was only like 4 days after it came out. And when we started playing around with it, we're like, "Oh my god, this is a different kind of technology. This is something different." And at that point, I became obsessed to the point where my family and my friends wouldn't talk to me for 6 months because all I wanted to talk about was AI. And it was crazy. Literally, I would read every article I can get my hands on. I was a research scientist, so I would dig deep into things and try to understand it, start to play with it. And I think I gave my first, talk on it in May of 2023, and since then, I've been really working with the water sector to see how, we can leverage this technology, how to be safe with it, because water utilities or the entities that I work with are critical infrastructure. So, we have to be very careful because human lives are at stake, and because of that, we have to move slowly and carefully and really understand what we're getting into. And so those are some of the areas that I've been focused on. I was a technical lead in a groundbreaking research project in the water sector where we looked at all these water. We had 21 utilities globally, and all of them did a utility led pilot that used and leveraged this generative AI. And each one of these pilots came out to something really positive. And sometimes it was a good ROI, sometimes it was a return on investment that was time saving, sometimes it was money savings, sometimes it was just, changing the way people work. So since then, I've just been very excited about it and I have proof that it can be very helpful. And it's a broad it's such a it's such a broad technology that it could be helpful to anyone in any sector.
So, one of the places I'd like to dive deeper for our listeners who are in a range of different fields, and I want to recognize are at different levels of proficiency, I'm sure, with AI. Some people might still have like a lot of fear around it or concern about their jobs, all of those things. So, with all of that dynamic, can you help us understand? You wanted to talk about the distinction between generative AI and the way that's being utilized in traditional AI. Can you speak more to that and help us suss out some of that part?
Yeah, so that's one of the first things I talk about, because a lot of times when people talk about AI, they use the term AI, artificial intelligence, and they're speaking about two different things. This latest version of generative AI is based on these concepts of large language models, which means that they're large because it was models that was trained on the entirety of the internet and all the textbooks, the law books, the medical books. And, that training took place over several months on large data centers. Um, and it uses something called natural language processing, so it understands human language. So generative AI can actually create new content that looks like human generated, like text or images and so forth. However, traditional AI, and all of this, I have a Venn diagram that shows AI really was a broad area of science that really talked about how we can get machines to think and do things like human beings. And that started in the late 1940s. And within that, there's something called machine learning. Machine learning is the ability for software, when you feed it a data set, to detect patterns. And then based on those patterns, it helps you predict the next level of patterns based on data sets. And then there's deep learning, which again is the same thing, except it's more based on neural networks, which is like the brain. It's like layers of these pattern recognition. So it's more complex pattern recognition and then complex predictive analysis based on data sets. And these data sets are like structured data. And what I mean by that is like things that can fit in an Excel spreadsheet. So, weather data or sales data, things like that. And that usually requires software developers to help you with the machine learning and deep learning software for your data sets. And it requires data scientists. And it's a very specialized field. And it's not that anyone can just pick up and start working on it. However, generative AI is a completely different ballgame because now, because of the human language interface, it has democratized all of these capability to all humans. All humans that, can use a language. And it's not just English, it's whatever language they're speaking. And that accessibility because of the human language, and you remember it, the Venn diagram shows that machine learning and deep learning are all parts of the large language model, so we have all those capability and they're accessible to all humans. Computer vision is accessible to all humans now. Code writing, as you've probably have heard, is accessible to all humans. People that were not software engineers can now develop applications because we're using human language to translate. So that's why I kind of differentiate generative AI, which is very accessible because of human language, and two, it's very affordable because it usually is free or it could cost, $20 a month. Or if you go to an enterprise version, it might cost up to $200 a month per user. But the capabilities are enormous. And relatively speaking, you can use it for the same capabilities as some of these very sophisticated digital applications. Does that answer your
Yes.
question?
Oh, I
Or
love it. Yes. Thank you, Gigi. It really helps set the stage and I think gives a good foundational understanding for our listeners that are at maybe different places. I'm wondering if we could put maybe that Venn diagram in the episode show
yeah,
notes, if you're willing.
yes,
So we
absolutely.
can link that so people can follow along with that. And what I think I want to ask next is when you're working with folks in this technology and they're maybe getting started and they hear you explain all of that, one of the like next concerns that I often hear in folks that I'm working with, because I'm deep into this world of AI usage in my space, is okay, I'm not an expert in X field. Let's take programming,
Yeah.
but I am an expert in whatever I'm wanting to build or create. Like if I want to create my own website with my own content, but it's just the missing layer for me was the programming part, like being able to get the HTML exactly how I wanted to move this layer over here, or have one of those things that pops up and the words change at the end, but the front of the sentence is the same, right? So actually writing that code, I wouldn't previously be able to do, but now I can. Okay, so let's say somebody's in a space like that, but they're not the expert in the programming. I think there's still this gap in people's minds that, like, I'm not gonna do it right.
Yeah, so let's say that's true. You're not going to do it right, but you certainly are going to learn something. And it's not going to be harmful, so go ahead and try it. And I want to just when we talk about AI, there's something called a chatbot. Like when we use Chat GPT, that's really just an interface. It's a chatbot, it's a human interface for us to put things in, but the real work is being done in the large language model behind the scenes. And then you have something called an agent, which many of your listeners, I'm sure, have either, started developing them or at least heard about them. And agents are not like chatbots where you have to prompt it and then it gives you some answers and things like that. This is you ask it to do something and it figures out what are the steps in order to reach that goal that you've asked it to do. And then it comes back to you at the end for human approval. So I would recommend, there's a few, there's about 5 large companies that or maybe there's more, but the main ones are OpenAI with ChatGPT, Gemini from Google, Claude from Anthropic, and Perplexity. If you go, for example, I actually did this not too long ago. If you go to Perplexity and you pay, I think I'm paying $17 per month
Yeah.
for my, subscription, and you can go into like there's skills and then there's something called computer, and computer is more like an agent. So you're building agents and start to work with it on building that website and just see what it comes back with and start to treat these engagements as back and forth. It's not like a one-time thing and then you step back and you just wait. No, you can reiterate and say, well, I really didn't like this, could you add this, and how would I add it to that, and how can I put documents in there, and just talk to it, and you'll be really surprised how powerful it is and how you're going to start to learn, what's the best way to engage to get the outcome that you're looking for.
What are some watch outs that you would say when, I think people are making decisions like, should I connect the agent to my calendar? Should I connect it to my email? And there's kind of this sense of, yes, there's so much power, let's experiment, but also, how do I ensure things are protected? How do you think about some of that? Of where is the gas, the pedal to the metal, and where do you have some brakes and caution?
Yeah. So I think that's a very personal decision. Everyone has to kind of go with what they feel comfortable with. I mean, so far, I haven't connected agents to my email, but a lot of people have, and they've had lots of success with it. A lot of people have, already started working with something like this, like Zapier, where you can integrate all these different things. I haven't. I did develop an agent. It's Gigi's assistant.
Love it.
And, I can ask her to do so many different things, go off and do some research, go off and put all these ideas together. And one thing I heard other people when they talk about generative AI, if you're a person with high agency and you're curious and
Mhm.
you have all these ideas in your head, then generative AI is going to work beautifully for you because you can kind of bounce things off of it and work and collaborate and things will get stronger and bigger. However, it's not good for people that just say, "Okay, tell me what to do about." just from nothing, from just blank space.
Right.
And a lot of people are expecting it to do things like that, and I don't think it works properly that way. I can tell you, I put together with another friend of mine a 5 hour self-paced, 5 module course online with something called the Water Tower, which is responsible for workforce training. And we talk about prompts, and prompts are really important. And we give a formula for a prompt, like, what is the role? What is exactly that you're asking for? How would you want it? And all that kind of stuff, which is all very good and important. But as you start to work with it, you realize that the most powerful prompt, at least in my experience, is when I ramble.
Yeah.
I just
Yeah.
ramble on and on
Well,
and
this is
on
great
and
news
on.
for
And,
me.
my husband gets so mad at me when I ramble. He's like, I can't take it anymore. But these AI systems, they can handle the rambling, the more little details and nuances you put in there, the better the output is. Like, don't do this and don't forget about that and add this and think about this and like, just put the normal prompt, but then go ahead and ramble, and then you get the kind of outcome that you're really looking for.
I think that's so interesting, Gigi, because I think some folks are stuck in like trying to get the prompt exactly right and trying to make it a specific exact formula. And I think there are things for which that can work. I have also found, especially if I'm doing something more exploratory, to literally think out loud with my AI friends and explain some of the nuance where I'm saying, like, I think this could work, but I'm concerned about this one part here.
Yeah.
And I want to make sure that you don't start to go in this direction. But then, I'm not dotting every I and crossing every T. Well, I guess I am because 'cause I'm typing. But my point is, I do think freely, and then I have seen interesting output with that because of the nuance of
Yes.
what I'm asking for. And then also over time, as I've learned to get more confidence in building out my projects, building out markdown files and skills and things like that. And I think when AI gets overly agreeable to maybe a direction that I had, I'll come back and ask it to give me the counter argument to
Yes.
help me think about that as well.
Yeah, and that's what I usually, so I give some, lately I've been giving a lot of keynote talks, and I put together, my slides and everything, and then I would say, be very, very critical and tell me exactly what's wrong with this and what are things that the audience might be expecting that I've neglected, and what are things that I'm saying too much of. And I really wanted to be as synchronized as possible to get the following four messages out, one, two, three, and give it all that information and say, please be extremely critical. And I actually say those exact
Yeah.
words, and it'll come back as like, yeah, well, this is a little bit too much, but you're missing this little gap here in understanding from point A to point B. So it could be very helpful if you're very specific with it as well when you need it to do something.
Gigi, you just mentioned sharing keynotes around this topic. What are some of the points you like to make sure your audience does take away in those? Not to give away your whole keynote.
The main thing is that this is a very powerful technology. I look at this technology, and I'm a technologist, so anytime something new comes up, I'm right there and I'm excited about it. This is something very different. This is like the invention of fire to human society. That's the way I equate this. It is not a technological evolution or a little step function. And in my talk, I talk a little bit about all the technologies that have come before it, like the compute, the circuits, the mobile, the internet. All of these things have already laid the foundation for this technology to just go at the at speed that it's going. No other technology has gone at this speed. And there's very little hindrance for this
Mm.
technology. It's not like we're waiting for one more piece of technology to help support this. We're almost all there. Robotics could be a different story. We're still waiting on some things in robotics, but as far as human access to this, anyone who has a mobile phone has access to this type of technology, and democratization is the way I call it. And that I think is going to be changing society. I think it's going to have a profound impact on society. And I do feel like we might go through a rough time in the next few years because it's just so mind-boggling where it's gonna end up. But I have a feeling is once we get over that little, rough edge, I'm very optimistic about the world that we're gonna all be living in.
Okay, I wanna hear more about that. One of the courses that I'm helping one of my clients with is a futures thinking course, and so
Oh,
we're talking a lot about you can't build and design a future that you can't imagine. There's fear, there's pessimism, there's job replacement, and all these
yes.
things, and I wanna, like, honor and hold that. I recognize that. It is, like, moving so quickly, and there will be job displacement, and yet I would love to hear more people talking about the potential future, the potential, problems solved that also can be true if we design for those, if we consider those, if we come together as humans
Yes.
and think about what, flourishing humanity looks like. So can you talk to us more about that vision and what you see that gives you like a smiling face right now and hope about that?
I will, but if you don't mind, Tracy, if I could just address some of the concerns that you just
Yes.
talked about
Yes,
early,
please.
because I do also bring that up in my talks. There are a lot of reasons for concern, especially in the water sector. The rate at which data centers are being built out because of the arms race, the AI arms race between the U.S. and China. This is causing our current administration to really push out or reduce all barriers to building these data centers. And sometimes they go to places in rural areas where there's a lack of water resources or even infrastructure resources to support these data centers. So it is very problematic right now. I do say that we shouldn't trust it. With working with water in critical infrastructure, we haven't built the trust of these large language models yet, so we're building it, so we always have to have human in the loop or verification of it. It does hallucinate, and we have to be careful of that. We should always validate things. And then job replacement, at least in the water sector, I see it so far with all the experimentation, it has been more of job augmentation
Mhm.
and less about job replacement. And there is going to be a requirement to upskill. But I do feel, to your question now, this will save time. About 200 years ago, we humans did not go into the office and work 60, 80 hours a day under bright light with a computer in front of us. We spent a lot of time outside. We spent a lot of time socializing. We all had something to do, to live. But it wasn't to this world that we live in now. If you look at across the United States, we have more, health problems than before, mental problems than before. And I don't believe it's just because we're not measuring, compared to a couple hundred years ago, but life was a little bit slower then. And then we kind of talked ourselves into this new world where, like, we kind of brag about, oh, I did a 60-hour work week and I worked over the weekend and, rah rah. And I don't think those are things that are really human. This is not how we humans should exist on this beautiful planet. And we should be, more careful about the resources and how we use them and the recycling. And I just feel we need to build more relationship. We need to, have more empathy. We need to basically become more human and go back to our humanness.
I am curious to double click on what you were talking about within the water resources because this is something where I see a lot of conflicting information about. I've seen many different graphs. There's a specific graph that tries to equate like how much resource usage, both electricity and water, come from an interaction with an AI tool. Can you help us unpack that more?
Yeah, I mean, I've seen a lot of them. I haven't measured it myself, so I really don't know. But I've seen some like, oh, gallons every time you ask a question, which I don't think that's true. And I've seen up to like, point oh oh, 3 cents or
Wait.
three, like a very small amount of water. Oh, we got to remember like the amount of water used for data centers, and we should also question the amount of water used for golf courses.
Right.
That's
Some of
a
those
huge
comparisons or,
usage of
like,
water.
streaming services. So people that
Yes,
are saying, "Okay, I'm not gonna use AI because of the,
but I'm
impacts,
using
but I'm
yes,
gonna stream." And so those
Netflix. Yeah.
comparisons.
Yeah, so I don't think we got all the numbers right, and the way I wanna step back a little bit
Mhm,
and know that there is a lot of effort right now with all the companies to have zero water type of, building them with zero water, whether they use a
mhm,
different coolant, liquid, or they're recycling more
mhm.
of the water, or they're building data centers in cooler places. There's all kinds. I mean, this is a problem and it is problematic today, but there are solutions on the horizon. And when it comes to electricity and energy, they're looking more towards renewable
Mhm.
energy. I know my daughter is working in the nuclear energy field where they're building small little reactors that can support, even I think some of these small reactors can support data centers and things like that. So I know some of these problems are on their way to being solved, but it is problematic right now and it is hard to deal with. But this technology, the good that it's bringing to the medical industry, to pharmaceutical, to the banking industry, to even sustainability, it's looking at ways to improve sustainability through science and technology research. So I feel like there's a lot more good at this stage, and we are going through a hard time, and it is difficult. And we should be problem solvers and try to reconcile all of this. But I do think it's kind of temporary, and solutions are coming around the corner.
Okay, thanks for addressing that. I thought you'd be the exact right person to kinda make sense of some of those distinctions. So now I wanna go back to the vision of flourishing. And so what what does flourishing mean to you?
So flourishing to me means being more human. I feel like over the last 8 decades, we've become more robotic.
Yeah.
We're not I remember a time growing up where, people would just stop by at people's houses and hang out and talk about anything, and now we have to call, we have to
Yeah.
schedule, it's like it's not
It's like, I'll see you in
I don't
6
find it.
weeks at 4:45 when there's an opening in my Tetris calendar.
Yes. Yes,
Yeah.
and, let's get productivity and I think productivity as a concept is gonna go by the wayside because productivity is gonna be better done with AI.
Okay.
But productivity from a human perspective is more about the creativity. This is something that only humans can be, not the AI. Like, how do we think? What is the energy level between people and building a relationship and having empathy and making decisions based on all the senses, not just,
Yeah.
computerized stuff. So I feel like productivity, like things that take most of our time during the day when we go to work, some of those things could be pushed off and let AI do it. Like if
Mhm.
you generate reports that would take a couple of hours of your day, that can be done in a few seconds. And, that those 2 hours saved is not like, oh, well, let me fill it with more reports.
Right, I think that's the key. What do you choose to do? Because I find myself in this place as a bit of a recovering perfectionist, maybe workaholic, and could always feel that. It's deciding when is like enough and
Yeah.
stepping away, and which is a human decision pattern and behavioral construct, really, to say, this is what I'm trying to achieve, like being clear about your goals, being clear about the work that you're doing, but then when have you kind of arrived at least for the day, because there's
Yes.
always more to do.
There is always more, and I think that's how over time, like, if you would go back to your ancestor, like your great, 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 great grandmother or grandfather,
Yeah.
and see how they spent their day, yes, they were productive. Yes, they did do things during the day. It wasn't just like lounge around, but they also took time to lounge around, and that's not a bad thing. I don't know how many times, I mean, this has happened to me. You go on vacation for a week or two, you come back and all of a sudden some ideas come into your head that never would have landed in your head if you would have just, kept on going in your normal 2 weeks at work. But somehow by giving your brain this like
It's
this
that
freedom.
liminal space. The
Yes.
liminal space between it's the shower ideas, it's the, I started longer runs without a podcast in my ears. I solved
Yes.
so many problems on that long run that
Yes.
and all I had to do was protect that time from not being meeting time and go and leave my phone in the car, and it not that the point is the productivity, but it does end up being productive in that liminal space, and then also my mind I found is so much clearer. Like, I can think more clearly when I
100%.
give my body the rest it actually needs, which should be something we know. I do think we fall into the patterns of more and productivity that can become a constraint when we say, "Oh," when we try to be as unlimited as technology and as some of these tools that we're working with. One of the gifts I think we have as humans is the limitation
Yeah.
of we need to eat, we need to sleep, we need to pause. I believe those are created by design to help us be in a rhythm that's more conducive with that design. And when we try
Yes.
to eat over the sink, myself included, or like over the computer and not have that pause time between back to back Zoom meetings, we know what that does to our brain. We have the research that shows, and yet we still are inclined to get stuck in that pattern sometimes, I think.
And I think you're right. We are inclined to do that just from societal training. Like since
Yes.
we were young, this is productivity in this era. But if again, I always like to say, go back 200 years and
Right.
talk to your relative back then. They weren't programmed that way from a young childhood. They were programmed, yes, you have to be ethical, you have to do your work, you gotta work hard, but you also gotta play hard.
Right.
You gotta enjoy life, you gotta socialize, you gotta build those relationships. We're more alone now, than we ever have been as a society, and that to me is unfortunate, and that to me is anti-human.
Yeah.
So we need to get back to human characteristics, which is we're a very social species. We need to interact more physically, together in the same space, and work from home is great. And of course, that's what I do. But I love interacting with people. I love going outside. I have a garden that I work on, and in between all my calls, I usually go out, whether it's cold or hot, interact with
Right.
greenery and, get back part of human flourishing. And so you talk a little bit about human flourishing. So it is building more social web, if you will. You still need social behavior between
Yeah.
people. And we've lost a little bit of that over time. We need to get back more. We need to make that more of a priority.
Yeah.
That's the workforce of tomorrow, I believe, is we're going to have a better understanding of the humans that we're working with and less about productivity of the humans.
Right. I think it's that intentionality, Gigi, that I'm also thinking about instead of just more, what if it was just to maybe oversimplify a little bit, deeper?
Yeah.
There's this concept actually in education in competency-based learning where one of the concepts is, do you go further out into new concepts when a student has shown mastery, or do you go deeper into the existing concept? It's a choice, like, when you're
Yes.
designing. So I think it's the same thing here. Instead of more concepts, instead of more widgets that we're building, maybe AI can do that part of it, and
Yes.
we go deeper into what makes us human, and we sign off at a reasonable time, and so what is it really allowing us to do? And I think there's been times in the past where we thought we'd get there, but we've just somehow filled it with more. Like we used to have to do laundry by hand and hang it up and all that. Now we have washing machines and dryers. But where did that time go? Like that time savings go? Are we scrolling our phones instead during that time? And so I think it's the intentionality of choice, which is why I love life design work. Got me thinking further about all areas of life finances, mental health, spiritual health, physical health, all the things that are like under the iceberg that
Yes.
allows us to do the work and contribute to society in whatever place we are. But if we're not paying attention to those things underneath, at some point they'll come for us. And so
Yes.
thinking
Yeah.
about that flourishing as a 360 view of play, to your point, is an area that some of my traditional upbringing and intense college preparatory schooling taught me was kind of for later. Like, do the hard work first, you can play later. And that just continued over time until I looked up and realized, no, I want that now. I don't want to wait to like earn my play and rest, but to
Yes.
recognize it as part of a flourishing life, which is an area, that I continue to work on. So I think intentionality is what strikes me there of our
I
future
agree.
design.
Yeah, and I love what you just said about when you go on your runs, you put, I'm not going to listen to a podcast. I'm actually going to go and just be free
Yeah.
and see what I see and hear what I hear, and I think that's, we've lost a lot of people have lost that with these mobile phones that are
Yeah.
with us all the time, and myself included. And we need to have intentionality, like you said, in order to get away, and to me that's being more human. And I think those are gonna be the successful people in the
Mhm.
future. You're gonna create space in your brain to either go deeper, be more creative, and build more partnerships, collaborate more, and I agree, you first have to meet those needs. You need to spend more time on, your health. You need to spend more time on your mental health, and I think all of that helps your mental health, and that's what we've been talking about with flourishing.
Right.
Um, so yeah, I do think you're gonna get there.
So when it comes to, upskilling with AI, using it in these ways that may allow us to flourish, what do you think if only people knew?
If only people knew how easy it is to start experimenting with generative AI, regardless of the reasons why you've been avoiding it, and there are some really valid reasons like,
Yeah.
sustainability, of bias, of ethical reasons, and those are all leadership thought processes that will lend people in a place where they might not want to use it. However, it's not going to go away. And so if we could just start slow and start experimenting with it, I do believe it could be helpful in so many ways. We know it's going to be helpful in so many science areas and medical areas, and hopefully help us with societal areas like, why do we have poverty today, and all these billionaires, but yet we still have people in the street? Like, why do we have societies like that? Like, let's solve that problem.
Mm.
And I think it's going to help us solve a lot of these big problems. But to an individual, and especially women, I want to say, I just did a talk at a Raleigh professional women group, and I talked about how women are 25% to 30% using AI less than men. And I'd like to address that. I'd love for women to realize that this is going to be the future of how not only we work, but our personal lives. I can imagine a near future where we all have assistants to do things that did take a lot of our time, sort of like the washing machine.
Right.
Everyone ended up with a washing machine. Very few people say, I'm going to reject it and I'm going to wash my hands, wash my clothes and take 3 hours instead of, 2 minutes to put it in there. And I think that's the way this technology is going to go in a
Mhm.
personal life and in the work life. And if it starts to save you time, do not fill that time with more productivity work. Fill that time with becoming more the person you want to become and be that flourishing human, because that's going to make you very successful in that future where AI is going to sit side by side with humans.
Thank you so much for diving into this topic with us. I think that this will really help our audience who might be considering going deeper with AI wherever they are on kind of learning spectrum. And I love that in our conversation, you really helped balance it with the technology with the human flourishing. I do think that it is this intentionality that is going to help us go forward and design the future that we want, that will help with the problems that we're facing. We know there's many of those that our world has to work through. And I'm hopeful that our listeners will take away what is theirs to start to solve, what is theirs that they want to make an impact around and start exploring with this technology. So just want to thank you so much for your time and look forward to staying connected.
Me too.
For our listeners, if you want any more resources, we have a newsletter that goes out with our podcast. And so there will be one about this episode. And we also create a blueprint for thought, which is basically a thinking exercise that helps you take the concepts from the podcast and put them into action. So be on the lookout for those. And we'll put everything in the episode description. So thanks again, Gigi.
Thank you so much, Tracy. It was a pleasure.